I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. We have a few brief announcements before we get started. Today's webinar will be recorded and slides will be sent through email after the session. Also, this session has been approved for 1 hour of STC credit and is pending approval for BBS credit. Also, please be sure you remain muted throughout today's presentation, but feel free to drop your questions and comments throughout the webinar. People will either respond in the chat or get to them at the end. And now I can hand it over to Director Lucero for more opening comments.
Thank you, Mika. I'm so pleased to have been introduced by our amazing Youth Advisory Board member, Mika, and just want to thank you for all the work that you do for us. My name is Catherine Lucero, and I am the Director of the Office of Youth and Community Restoration, and I'm so glad you're joining us today for What Stories Do the Data Really Tell? Implications for Youth Justice Practice. We have a great lineup of experts, and I think that you will enjoy the discussion today. We live in a moment when headlines about youth crime are loud and can be misleading. Numbers get pulled out of context, trends are not fully reported, and fear fills the space where facts should be. Today's conversation is about changing that narrative and bringing clarity to the data that helps us all move our work forward together to improve youth justice systems outcomes, understanding and looking carefully at the data that exists. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Camilla Holloway, our Chief of Data and Research at OYCR, to get us started with a couple of quick polls and to introduce today's speakers. Camilla?
Thank you, Director. Before we dive in, we have two quick polls for you.
All right, we've got just about everybody. I can go ahead and share the results if you're ready, Camilla.
Yes, please. So as you can see with these results, which actually they just left my screen, but the majority of folks entered false on question 1 and false on, on poll 1 and false on poll 2.
And I
But
can
you'll
call it
learn,
out, Camilla. I can
yeah,
call
if
it
you
out if
could.
that's helpful. Yeah, the first one was true or false, youth arrests in California are escalating, and 61% of people guessed false. And the second one was youth are arrested in California at higher rates than adults, and 75% of the people answered false to that one as well.
Yes, okay. Thank you. So you'll learn what the data shows during today's presentation, and you can find out if you guessed correctly. Now, I'll go ahead and introduce the people who will be guiding us through today's presentation. So first, we have Tom Woods. Tom will open our discussion by painting the national picture. A couple of things to know about Tom is that Tom is a senior associate for the Juvenile Justice Strategies Group at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, where he has provided direct technical assistance to partners and grantees in more than 24 states in areas including data analysis, racial and ethnic disparity analysis, and policy impact. He has led and authored Casey Foundation publications on the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative and National Juvenile Justice Data Insights, including the blog post that anchors today's national data segment. Then we'll have Scott McDonald, and Scott will bring California's data into focus. Scott brings 40 years of probation experience, including service as a retired chief probation officer in Santa Cruz County, California. Scott currently consults with OYCR to implement reforms following the closure of the Department of Juvenile Justice institutional facilities, making him uniquely positioned to connect what the California data shows to what it means for our system right now. And to close our discussion, we will have Chief Daniel Hernandez, and he will show us what it looks like when data actually drives practice. Chief Hernandez has served in the Orange County Probation Department for 32 years, rising from working the night shift at Juvenile Hall to his appointment as Chief Probation Officer in 2022. Having served along the way as Director of Juvenile Hall and Chief Deputy over the Juvenile Services Bureau. Chief Hernandez is recognized as a leader in the probation services field. And today he'll show us how one county is using data and evidence to make real, equitable decisions about youth. I will invite Tom to join us now to get the conversation started. Thank you, Tom.
Great, thank you, Camilla. It's great to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak to this audience. California is a bellwether for the nation. So any chance that we get, sort of way over here on the East Coast, any chance that we get to speak to and work with people in California, we welcome it. So thanks very much for having me. Um, so I guess well, spoiler alert, for better or for worse, I was trained to sort of get to the bottom line on the first slide, to title your slide to sort of give away the ending. So I guess I've kind of, sort of, tipped my hand a little bit, at least, on the answer to one of the questions that was posed in the poll. What is happening with overall youth crime trends in the United States? And they are still falling, or I guess you could say that they're falling again after a little kind of disruption during COVID. We'll look at those numbers in a minute. But I also wanted to kind of pose and start to explore a little bit a follow-up question that's associated with that. Sort of if youth crime is still falling or falling again, as the data is telling us, why isn't everyone celebrating? Why does it feel like we're still kind of in sort of trying to sail into a headwind in terms of public opinion and the policy environment? I don't have a complete answer to that question, but I thought that it would be helpful to kind of start to explore that a little bit and to provide a little bit of information from other data sources that might shed some light on that. And one of my goals with this presentation is not just to kind of show what the data shows, but to show a little bit about where the data came from. So I really encourage you if you kind of see anything that strikes your curiosity that you want to learn more about, at the end of the presentation deck, there's a slide with sort of links to all of the sources that I used for all of the charts that you're going to see in this presentation. All of it's interesting. There's a wealth of information out there these days, and I really encourage you to take a look at that slide and to follow some of those links and just kind of see what you learn and see what you discover. So yeah, let's go to the first climb. So this is sort of the bottom line, that there was a long, steady decline in youth crime up through 2019 that was interrupted during the COVID era, but clearly not reversed. So just a word about the actual figures that are shown on this slide. The gray line on this is an indicator of juvenile arrests, total juvenile arrests nationwide. The dark black kind of dotted line is showing the number of youth who were admitted to detention in a sort of in a recent year, each year that they've done the census of juveniles in residential placement. And the orange line is very recent information from a new data source that the Casey Foundation launched in 2020 at the start of the pandemic. Since January of 2020, going back to that month, for a pretty big swath of the country, about 20% of American youth live in jurisdictions that participate in this survey. So for that period of time, we have for every month the number of kids who were in detention at the start of the month and the number of kids who were admitted during the month. And it's a very unique data set. We haven't had kind of monthly data, kind of finger on the pulse data like that in juvenile justice really ever on this scale. And one of the things that it has that it's enabled us to do is it's basically given us kind of a peek around the corner of what's coming in the national statistics. And just because these numbers represent very different things, I kind of anchored everything to its value in 2019, just to show the trends, just kind of how things are changing relative to their 2019 level, rather than showing the actual values that go along with each indicator. So basically, you can see from the late 90s, early 2000s, up through about 2019, it was a very consistent. I mean, different indicators are measuring different things, but they were all telling the same story, that youth crime was going down. The severity of youth crime was going down. Fewer kids were being incarcerated. Then COVID came along, and there really was a dramatic drop in indicators both of juvenile arrests and juvenile detention, like juvenile confinement. That was followed over the next couple of years, from like 2021 to about 2023. You could see those numbers starting to climb back up again. And we could see that in our monthly youth detention survey. And for a lot of people, that was a real gut check. it basically sort of opened the possibility that maybe that, sort of the drop due to COVID was just kind of a shock to the system, and now the numbers are coming back up again. Could we be seeing a return, or kind of a repeat of the real surge in juvenile crime that we saw in the 80s and 90s? What we could see as of about 2023 was that really the number of admissions peaked in sort of recent post-pandemic peak in early 2023, and we're falling through 2023 and then 2024 and then all the way through 2025. So we had an inkling that when the national data came out, it was going to show that juvenile crime had resumed its downward trend that we saw before the pandemic, and that big drop in that early period of the pandemic may have had a lot to do with the fact that schools were closed. And schools have always been, not just sort of referrals from school, but arrests and other sort of referrals to juvenile court that involve kids going to and from school. If kids are going out to school, they're out and in circulation more. And that sort of increases the opportunity, or their sort of exposure to the risk of doing something unwise, of breaking the law, of getting arrested. So we sort of speculated that once schools had kind of reopened and were getting back into some kind of normal routine, that the school referral numbers would start to kind of stabilize and then drop. And that basically is what we've been seeing. Now, should we be completely shocked by this? In some ways, that news is, the news is even better than that when you compare what's been happening with juvenile arrests and adult arrests. Over the long term, juvenile arrests have come down a lot more than adult arrests. And here I'm just showing, this isn't even like all arrests. This is just arrests for serious violent crimes. For a long time, every year before 2012, the juvenile arrest rate for serious violent crimes was higher than the adult arrest rate for serious violent crimes. So it's just kind of an accepted fact that kids are more likely to commit violent crimes than adults. That stopped being true about 2011, 2012, and that gap has been sustained. It's still 16% lower as of 2024, the latest data that we have. That's a real sea change. And you can see around the pandemic, there's been some kind of difference between the adult trends and the juvenile trends, but really sort of the pandemic kind of threw a little bit of a wrench in there for a couple of years, but we've really returned to pretty much the pre-pandemic trends, sort of relationship between the adult and juvenile trends. If you could go to the next slide. And any time that we talk about sort of youth and violent crime, I just always take the opportunity to kind of reinforce what a mistake it is to conflate juvenile crime and violent crime, because juvenile crime accounts for a very small share of violent crime, and violent crime accounts for a very small share of juvenile crime. The vast majority of kids who get arrested or come into contact with the system are not brought in for committing a serious violent offense, and the vast majority of serious violent offenses are not committed by juveniles or don't even involve juveniles as perpetrators. So I think what's important about that is that when people are rightly concerned about kids getting in trouble with the law, and when they're rightly concerned about public safety and protecting the public from violent crime, both of those are totally valid concerns, but they're not the same concerns. The things that need to be done in order to control, to reduce the prevalence of juvenile crime and to help kids be more law-abiding and to keep them away from the harm that system involvement can cause. There are a whole set of strategies around that, and there are a whole bunch of things that we need to do to reduce violent crime and keep people safe in their communities. And those things sometimes bump up against each other, but they really are very different problems. So next slide. So given all of this, I guess the question is, why is the prevailing mood around so much of the country, certainly in many of the places that we bump up against, why does it feel like there's more sort of pessimism or doubt or worry at this moment when the data is starting to say that okay, that it looks like we're not seeing a return to the sky high juvenile crime rates or violent crime rates that we saw maybe 20 or 30 years ago. First of all, I think it's important to just acknowledge public opinion about crime, and this applies to policymakers and justice system actors as well. Our views about crime are not, they never move in lockstep with the data. Our perceptions and our prescriptions about what to do are shaped by our own experiences, really first and foremost, and by the opinions of those that we associate with, and of our peers, at least as much as they are by data and research. At the same time, data and research matter. They can help us to understand not just what's going on right now, um, but also they can help us to understand why the trends might not be feeding into public opinion and the policymaking environment in ways that we might suppose. So I'm going to just run through a couple of reasons why that disconnect might exist. So next slide. So first of all, it's very true that falling rates of crime can absolutely coexist with increasing fear of crime. And that happened around 2020, 2021 to a greater extent than we've ever seen. So I've got two charts here. The one on the left comes from a Gallup survey, and this is asking just sort of the general public um, and this is the same survey where Gallup asks, how concerned are you about public safety? Do you think that crime is going up or down in your community or nationwide? They also ask questions about how you personally, how fearful are you of becoming a victim of crime? Um, and what we can see is that there was a big spike in that level of personal fear, starting in 2020 and continuing up through about 2022, 2023. That's not the only data source where we can see that, and we know that same dynamic has applied specifically to young people when we look at the chart on the right, which comes from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey that's been administered every other year to high school students nationwide. It's a very large scale, sort of long term, it's a real, kind of anchor of national data on youth. And for a long time, they asked this question: did you miss school in the past year because you felt unsafe at school or on the way to or from school, just out of safety concerns? And the percentage of kids who miss school due to that kind of fear was pretty low and pretty stable right up until about 2020, 2021. And certainly in 2023, we saw a level of kids reporting that they actually get into fights in school that was close to an all-time low. Kids saying that they were threatened at school that were like up a little bit from a few years ago, but no higher than they were in like 2001, 2003. And yet the level of fear, the level of sort of kids missing school due to fear had doubled since that time. So fear is not just about perceived risk, but about perceived vulnerability. And that has to do with basically, do you think that there's anyone out there to protect you? Do you think that that you're going to be well looked after? And one of the things that really sort of stands out when you look at the Gallup data, the responses about fear track not very closely people's understanding about the level of crime. What they track much more closely is their level of confidence in the police, in the courts, in the law enforcement system generally. So when people have doubts about how effective law enforcement and the criminal justice system generally are in responding to crime, then you see fear go up, and that changes the way that people experience and the way that they perceive information that comes to them about crime and violence. So the next slide. Okay. And this is, I mean, this could be a whole presentation in itself, but the last several years have given us a lot of reasons to be worried about young people generally, whether that's increasing child poverty since the pandemic, learning loss, chronic absenteeism from school, increasing indicators of mental health distress among kids, increasing access to guns, and increasing increasing victimization of kids by firearms. All of these are big problems on their own and real valid reasons for concern. And in the past, they've tended to be associated with increased juvenile crime. So it's kind of an understandable leap that people might take. to see headlines and to see indicators about these different trends affecting kids, and to think that that must mean that juvenile crime is rising. This time it's not. We can see the numbers and the way that they're coming in. And there may be a lot of reasons for that. And I think just sort of as a field and as a society, we're going to be exploring that and learning a lot about that in the coming years. But I think for right now, it gives us a bit of maybe some understanding of where that kind of disconnect is coming from, but also kind of something to work with. Maybe there's some common ground there to kind of meet people and say, well, we understand why you're worried. You're right to be worried. There's concerns about kids. But to kind of make the leap from that to say that kids are doing more harm than they used to, that doesn't appear to be to be showing up in the national data. And it means that as we think about each of those, kind of direct concerns about youth, maybe we should think about trying to respond to those directly, rather than sort of relying on the juvenile justice system to kind of pick up the pieces, sort of as these trends are playing out. Next slide, please. Another thing to bear in mind, and I think this goes to people's general understanding of what's going on with crime and violence. I think it's just a reality that when you look at arrest statistics and compare those to other measures of public safety, whether that's reported crimes reported to the police, or self-reported victimization in national surveys, but just kind of asking people, have you been a victim of crime in the last 6 months? And basically the trends on arrests since about 2010, 2011, arrests have been coming down, have kind of continued to fall, while those measures of reported crime and reported victimization have kind of leveled off. So that gap has been increasing, and I'm not sure exactly what's behind that, what's behind that growing gap, but I think it can, sort of color the way that people perceive the arrest statistics. That when we go out to the world and say juvenile crime is continuing to fall, youth are not, sort of committing a larger share or significantly different share of crime than they used to. People might have their doubts. People might say, like, that doesn't line up with the way that I understand the world. I think the important thing to remember about this is that reported crimes, self-reported crimes, we don't know who the perpetrator was in those cases. So we shouldn't assume. There's nothing in the other data that we have that would lead us to assume that the trends are much different among young people than among all people. And we know that the vast majority of serious crimes that people are talking about in these indicators, the vast majority of them are in fact committed by adults. So I think this is kind of a disconnect that we should understand is out there, and that we should be able to acknowledge without kind of conceding that that gap must represent something different about young people. And I think it also is probably worth pointing out to the extent that that arrests are continuing to fall. I mean, that could actually be we could take that as sort of a proof point, or kind of a validation that when we keep kids away from the system, that actually leads to better public safety. I guess the last point, despite all of this, it would be very easy to pick up the newspaper, listen to the evening news. It's very easy to kind of find information sources that are telling you that everything's terrible with youth crime, and kind of encouraging us to go back to policies that were popular and were sort of the prevalent responses in say the 80s and 90s. The problem is that really public opinion has actually moved since then in favor of treating youth different than adults. And public opinion has never put more faith in kind of stronger law enforcement to produce public safety than in addressing social problems and addressing the root causes of crime. People have always preferred strategies that address root causes. They've never seen, there's never been a majority of Americans that think that we can, sort of incarcerate or enforce our way out of whatever public safety challenges we're facing. And whereas it actually used to be a pretty common view, widely held view, that young people who commit violent crimes should be treated the same as adults, that is no longer the majority view. Now the majority view is that young people should be treated more leniently than adults. So I think that's something that we should sort of take to heart. I think that's an accomplishment of the last decade or two, to kind of instill that understanding with people and sort of get the word out about that. Obviously, there's more to do on that front, but it's that message is getting through, and that sort of provides a starting point for thinking about what to do next and where we go from here. And then the last slide. Yeah, so I think my big takeaway from all of this is that falling youth crime can help to make the case for a restorative developmental approach, but it's not enough. And maybe shame on us a little bit for I think maybe because the numbers were going down year after year after year, maybe we got too comfortable in sort of counting on that sort of tailwind to carry us through, and not really kind of connecting the dots as much as we need to. I think that people need to be made aware of the declining youth crime trends. They need to be reminded about all the evidence that a restorative, developmentally informed approach to youth justice works better. But crucially, I think they also need to be reassured and kind of shown the evidence that public systems, including but not limited to, obviously, law enforcement and justice system agencies, are capable of implementing that kind of approach successfully and sustainably. The evidence is out there. And I think we just need to kind of lift up those examples much more often, and much more sort of intentionally than we have in the past. Because it's not just a matter of selling people on the virtue of one individual approach, or one individual program. It's reminding people that this is the approach that works, and that this is the foundation that we should be building on, and not just isolated examples here and there. And again, my contact information is in the slides, and the last slide is a list of references to all the data that I just cited. And thank you for your time.
Great. So, Tom, thanks so much for doing this for us. Thanks so much for covering the national data so well, and also a lot of the context around it. You've given us a lot to think about. Turns out that at the same time that Tom was putting this information together at the Casey Foundation, on behalf of OYCR, my team at Just Solve produced a brief on juvenile arrests in California, which I will summarize in this short presentation. The brief provides an overview of youth arrest trends for misdemeanor and felony offenses in California, as I mentioned, drawing primarily from the data reported in the California Department of Justice website. That brief is available on OYCR's website, but will also be posted in the chat. So let's go to the next slide. So we saw the national trends. What do things look like in California? You'll remember the poll that we did at the beginning of this. Are youth arrests in California escalating? And most folks got it right. Let's go to the next chart, the next slide. Most folks got it right, but 39% thought it was escalating. And so we're going to unpack that a little bit. And I'll just say, by and large, the folks on this call have expertise in youth justice, by and large. And so you can imagine that JQ Public might answer that question differently. But 39% had felt that it was escalating, but you can see from the results here that over the past 2 decades, California has seen a dramatic and sustained decline in juvenile arrests. Since 2000, youth arrests have fallen by 84%, from approximately 204,000 to 32,000 arrests, reaching historic lows even before the pandemic. By 2019, youth arrests in California had dropped to an all-time low when COVID-19 struck. That decline became even more pronounced during a time of school closures and stay-at-home restrictions, where there were reductions in social interactions, police stops, and law enforcement procedures. As a result, from 2019 to 2021, California experienced a once-in-a-generation decline of youth arrests, falling another 54% during that period. So let's go to the next slide. From 2000 through 2019, youth misdemeanor and felony arrests, including violent felony arrests, all declined sharply in California. Notably, youth misdemeanor arrests declined more than felony arrests during this period of time, from 139,000 to 22,000 in 2000 to 22,000 in 2019, representing an 84% decrease, compared to 63,000 in felony arrests in 2000 and 16,000 in 2019, representing a 75% decrease. Most recently, between 2023 and 2024, youth misdemeanor arrests rose 10%, while youth felony arrests declined by 4.7%. And youth felony arrests also fell slightly. So, what might have been happening during the COVID period of time is that not only all the factors that were mentioned around youth just not being in school, being more socially isolated, not subject to arrest, but also the choice to arrest misdemeanors was probably taken more judiciously during COVID, and might explain the bump back after COVID of misdemeanor arrests to a certain extent. Let's go to the next slide. So with all these reductions, we would see in headlines talk about the sharp increase in juvenile arrests from 21 to 24, which was approximately 70%. Those headlines are quite misleading due to what we experienced during the COVID years. This chart shows that the COVID disruption, this chart sort of illustrates the COVID disruption in arrests and other factors. So while arrests were low during COVID, and other factors are impacting childhood well-being, looking at this chart, as we came out of COVID arrests, we actually were bouncing back to pre-COVID levels. And during COVID, misdemeanor arrests fell more sharply, as I mentioned before. But so it's this sort of COVID bounce back that may have spurred some of these headlines that were sort of suggesting that the sky might be falling in terms of juvenile crime. Let's go to the next slide. But had COVID not happened, and while the silver lining might be a lower, steeper reduction in crime, we might have seen a trend line like the dotted trend line here. And the point of this is that without COVID, we would see this long trajectory of a steady decline in youth crime that we continue to have today, where it's slightly below what we saw pre-COVID. Second poll question. Youth are arrested in California at higher rates than adults. Most people got this correct as well. Let's go to the next slide. Youth arrests are not only down in California in absolute terms, they also represent a shrinking share of total arrests in California. In 2000, youth made up approximately 15% of all arrests statewide. In 2024, that figure is just 4%. And another point about that is on the next slide. Notably, this is significantly lower than the portion of the population in California who are youth, which is 22%, as well as lower than the proportion of population who are ages 14 to 17. So if we took that smaller group of youth at that age, who are 5%, they are still the share of crime is still lower than what would it be accounted for if all things were equal in terms of adults and juveniles. So youth commit a smaller share of crime. So while youth arrests decreased substantially in California from 2000 through 2024, racial disparities increased during this period. In the year 2000, for example, Black youth were approximately 2.5 times as likely as white youth to be arrested relative to their population sizes. And Hispanic youth were approximately 1.1 times as likely as youth to be arrested. By 2024, Black youth were approximately 5.7 times as likely as white youth to be arrested, and Hispanic youth were approximately 1.5 times as likely as white youth to be arrested relative to their population sizes. These disparities in arrests cannot be explained by racial and ethnic differences in how youth break the law. Surveys asking youth about their law-breaking behavior, known as self-report data, find only modest differences in offending rates by race or ethnicity for most offense categories. Also, research finds that neighborhood characteristics influence how police officers exercise discretion in ways that make youth of color more vulnerable to stops and arrests. It's good news that the numbers are down, but the disparities are persistent and getting worse. Next slide. So to summarize all this, while any offense, particularly those causing harm, is an offense too many, the significant reductions in arrests seen over the past quarter century are a welcome trend. These positive changes coincide with a research-based approach taken by many jurisdictions informed by adolescent brain science, developmental research, and evidence-based practices. We should stay this course and double down on our efforts to ensure an equitable application of our interventions that benefit all youth, especially youth of color who are disproportionately overrepresented in the system. So to that point, I want to turn to Chief of Orange County, Daniel Hernandez. Orange County has a long history of using research to guide practice. In 1999, the chief at the time published research known as the 8% solution, which was the beginning of the research addressing risk factors associated with repeat juvenile justice involvement. That research has evolved over time. We know a lot more about the adolescent brain, trauma, and critical factors in juvenile justice. And practitioners continue to rely on research-based methodologies to address and respond to youthful offending. Chief Hernandez is leading a lot of efforts from the first point of contact to the deep end of the youth justice system that are based on research. He will be touching on one example of this continued focus on what works in youth justice. So with that, I'd like to turn to Chief Hernandez.
Thank you, Scott, for that introduction. So yeah, we do embrace the legacy of relying on research here in Orange County, and also both me personally and other assignments. I work closely with the Casey Foundation, and am also just a data guy from long ago as well. So I've personally been very fascinated by data and relying on evidence and whatnot in our decision making, and so that's something that we do take very seriously here. And so I want to start with this one aspect, this one example that we're going to highlight today. If you can go to the next slide. I want to credit our county CEO's office. This OC Cares initiative is something that was led at the county level. And this began some 7 or 8 years ago. And the intent was to get all system partners together to address, identify gaps in our justice system across all systems, including social services, law enforcement, healthcare, and the like, to identify duplicated services or gaps in services, just to align the county as a whole to serve the most needy and highest service utilizing clients in the entire county, both adult and juvenile. And so one of the areas that, and by the way, this process involved community members and system folks across months and months of convenings to help identify what these needs and gaps were. And so one of the areas that was highlighted was prevention. And of course, in probation, we often wring our hands at what we could possibly do with prevention, because of course, by definition, that happens before us. And so oftentimes we can address things that happen once we get a youth referred to us. It is often very frustrating if potential impacts or changes or disproportionality and those kinds of things happen before we get them. So prevention by definition is before probation's involvement, and therefore very difficult for us to impact. But through this process, we identified that a gap or a potential benefit would be enhancing police-based diversion. So pushing the involvement or resources in our community further upstream to help impact referrals of youth to probation in the first place. So what you see on your screen right now is a dashboard that we created recently. There's a difference between recidivism rates and measures. And so this is one way that I can, in real time, this is updated every day, get an indicator of what violation rates or reoffense rates look like as a measure, as something that I can use to help make decisions. And so rather than have a controlled study that lasts for years and then it's old by the time you get that information, this is real-time data that I can look at. And so what you're looking at is non-war, these are non-custody, lower level offenses that are referred to us out of custody by police. And then by statute, probation officers can work with those youth and families to try to keep them out of the system without filing that petition, the application for a petition with the district attorney or with the court. So what you're looking at is 1 year reoffense rates for youth that were referred to us out of custody. And so what you're seeing is a progression of within 1 year, 19% of youth that we handled through diversion had another application filed. And then you see that decrease to only 11% had charges actually filed by the DA as a result of that application. And then what might be surprising is only 5% of youth referred to us for diversion had a sustained disposition 1 year post diversion. So if you flip that stat, what that means is 95% of the kids that we had contact with or referred to us for diversion did not have a new sustained offense 1 year post intervention. And so while that might sound wonderful and we should just pack up our bags and go home, we have 95% success rate. What that can also say is maybe there's a percentage of those youth that shouldn't have come to us in the first place. And so that's what gets to this frustration of how do we affect those youth, or how do we prevent youth from even coming to us in the first place? We know that there's evidence that even minor contact with the system, even these youth that are being referred to us for diversion still have to come to a probation building, still have to meet with a probation officer, those kinds of things. And so if we can prevent even those types of interactions, we believe we can likely impact diversion even further. And so we did what we proposed through a Prop 47 grant application was to enhance that police-based diversion, like you heard was identified through our OYCR's initiative. So we can go to the next slide. So as we propose the grant opportunity through Prop 47, in our RFP or in our grant proposal, which we did receive, by the way, it's $8 million over a 4-year period. We RFP'd for community-based providers to work with police departments to allow for a police officer who encounters a young person for a lower level offense, something they're not going to be detaining this youth for, that they would normally be referring to us out of custody for diversion, for them to be able to have an immediate referral to a community-based organization to have that immediate intervention without sending that youth referral to probation at all. So it's a true, pushing of the intervention to the front door of the system. And in this proposal, as we were meeting with potential vendors in the community, we use the slide that you're seeing right now in our RFP to identify our top referring cities, top referring law enforcement agencies. And what we were intending to do by sharing this information is we wanted to give preference to providers who could work in those highest referring cities. Again, using that data to help make the biggest impact in our referrals. And so the county currently only has 2 police-based diversion programs, meaning police departments or cities had on their own engaged with a community-based organization to do this kind of work. And so I'm happy to say that the folks in my department who envisioned pursuing this grant for this purpose saw that as a need for replication. We have these 2 police departments who already had very successful diversion programs, and we have 20 other law enforcement agencies in our county that didn't. And so it was a very, ripe opportunity to replicate police-based diversion and hopefully prevent more and more youth from being referred to us in the first place. We can go to the next slide. So I'm happy to share that, again, over a lengthy process, we have identified 3 community-based organizations who will be recommended to our board in just about 3 weeks to get approval to receive this grant award. And the way we designed the grant and the RFP process is this is about 95% CBO community-based organization run. The only funds that are intended to go to both police and probation are for our referral time, for some reporting requirements and administrative oversight. So the vast amount of the funding is going to fund these 3 community-based organizations to prop up and replicate those police-based diversion programs that again have already shown to be successful. I'm also happy to share that when I went to our police chief meeting and shared this opportunity, about a year ago, I had police chiefs, clamoring over themselves to participate. This is something that is just seen as absolutely mutually beneficial to the youth and the family. Of course, they get the immediate intervention, but also and diversion, but also from the police perspective, they're working with youth that oftentimes they don't get to see the outcome. They'll send their referral in the mail, or sometimes they're hand delivered, and they never know what happened to that case or that youth or family. And here they're able to participate in and be a part of the direct referral for immediate intervention. Another thing that we found through our work with the Casey Foundation in years past is it can take months for one of those police out of custody referrals to get to us, and then months for that intervention to occur. And so we know from adolescent brain development and just lots of other evidence that it's that immediate intervention that is so much more meaningful and also can prevent subsequent behaviors and subsequent applications from coming in if that intervention is immediate. So I'm happy to share that, yes, there are many police departments who are going to participate. They did provide letters of support to those agencies that applied. And so we are very excited to replicate what has been shown to be successful in a couple police departments as widely as possible throughout our entire county, with the intent of reducing referrals to probation and actually saving resources and reallocating resources in the process if we never get those cases to begin with. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Tara.
Yeah, I think I'll take this as Scott.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I wanted to thank our speakers today for the excellent information that they presented. There were a couple questions in the chat I'll touch on just briefly, but don't have time to go deeply. Tamara, you asked a couple questions, and I think you made some good points. The data that I presented in California was arrest data. So part of that is who gets arrested, and we did not go deeply at county level stats on that. But I think, as I concluded, disparities are getting worse. So who gets arrested and that decision, who is policed and what geographies is a factor. So, and I think that's what you were possibly getting at, and it should be looked at, right? So there was also a question about, it looks like I might be missing a couple, but there was a more recent one about why would probation be involved in diversion youth? I think what Chief Hernandez is saying, he's taking a leadership role actually to not be involved in diversion at the front ends, actually. Maybe you could speak to that.
And it's important to note that the Welfare and Institutions Code here in California puts probation between the police and the district attorney in many cases. There's also law that requires the filing of the serious and violent types of offenses with the DA, but many offenses fall to probation for screening prior to filing with the DA. So that's a statutory framework here in California. And I also saw another question about what is police-based diversion. And so that the concept is that a police department, once they have arrested a youth, they send the referral to a community-based organization instead of the probation department. And so if that CBO will identify the needs of that youth and family, address them in the ways that they do, and then if the program or intervention is deemed successful by the community-based organization, that application for petition is never filed. And so we will never see it. We are not involved. We do not get probation does not receive those. And so it would only be should the CBO determine that was not successful, would they push it back to the police department and they could decide whether they wanted to submit it to us or not.
Yeah, so there are a number of comments just generally interested in police referred community-led diversion models, and it is something that it's a priority focus for the Child Welfare Council. It is something that the Office of Youth and Community Restoration is supporting in ways that we can. And we know very clearly from the research that it is a very important and potentially impactful decision point to address racial inequities and disparities in the system. And there's in Daniel Chief Hernandez's own backyard, we have the Crossroads study out of UC Irvine that really clearly established that early intervention is very effective for young people. So it's something that it's an area that we can continue to grow. So with that, I think I can turn to Mika to close us out and bookend this webinar. So Mika, back to you.
Yes. Hello. I just want to thank the speakers for sharing today and your presentation. It was so insightful. And I want to give some Youth Advisory Board insight and connections. The headlines demonize young people and they're inaccurate. The numbers tell a different story, and and it's more hopeful one. And we're more than numbers, and we're individuals with our own stories. And with the right support and opportunities, we can flourish and grow. And with that, we can do closing announcements. We welcome you to take the survey to provide feedback on your experience in today's webinar. and the link will be added to the chat. This webinar recording will be available on the OYCR website by the end of the week, and the slides will also still be sent in a follow-up email. And you can stay tuned for additional information about next month's webinar, and the time and dates will also be shared in that email. And that concludes today's webinar. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us today.